Hello, this is Dr. Davis. Welcome to the Arab-Israeli conflict since 1948. This narrated lecture will take us from the founding of the State of Israel in April of 1948 up until the early 21st century, around 2006-2007. This slide here shows us an early meeting of the Israeli Knesset. The Knesset is the Israeli parliament, and the Knesset still meets regularly today. And we can see there's a picture of Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, above the meeting here, and he's peering over one of the first meetings of the new state of Israel, which was his dream when he was a Zionist in the 19th century. And we can see to the right a banner with the Star of David, which is the symbol of the Israeli nation. Here we see jubilant Israelis celebrating the founding of Israel in the spring of 1948. And as we mentioned in the previous lecture, this idea of a Jewish homeland or nation state had been part of the Jewish collective memory for thousands of years, and here it had come to fruition. In this slide, we can see the outcome of the War of 1948 on Palestinians themselves, and we can see that there was a major exodus of Palestinian Arabs out of Palestine as a result of the war, and we can see that Egypt here received 7,000 people of Palestinian descent. 26% ended up in what is today called the Gaza Strip, 380,000 in the West Bank, 70,000 to Transjordan, 75,000 to Syria, 4,000 to Iraq, 100,000 to Lebanon. So we can see that the war disrupted Palestinians who had been living in this region for a very, very long time. And as a result, the bulk of the Palestinian Arabs live in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip today. And this is really a major point of contention between Israelis and Palestinians, because if there is ever going to be a Palestinian state, then how do you link the two? How do you link Gaza with the West Bank without cutting Israel down the middle? So this is really a serious issue. So today, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are considered territories. They're not part of any nation state. It's where Palestinians have a certain amount of autonomy. Okay, there is what is called a Palestinian Authority with a president who administer the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. But the Israeli army can enter the West Bank and Gaza at will. And that today is the cause of a lot of tension between Palestinians and Israelis. Now, in 1967 and 1973, there were two wars that were fought between the Israelis and Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. In 1967, the Israelis actually attacked the Egyptians in the Sinai Peninsula because they feared an attack. And then 1973, Israel was surprised by its Arab neighbors who launched an invasion. But in both cases, Israel emerged victorious. This is a very interesting map that was provided by the United Nations in November of 1993, and it lists the number of refugees in camps in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, the West Bank, and Gaza. And this has been a very unfortunate outcome of the War of 1948. You have hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who were essentially forced to leave Palestine, their traditional home, and live in refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And this has been a cause of real instability, not only for Israel, but also for the surrounding Arab nations, because these nations, in many cases, have very diverse ethnic populations, and adding one more ethnicity into the mix can lead to a lot of instability. Also, these Arab nations have been very reluctant to allow Palestinians to leave the camps. Okay, and you can see here as an example around Beirut, around Damascus, around Amman. These camps have been in existence since 1948, and Palestinians have not been allowed to integrate into these Arab societies. And the question becomes, if the Jordanians or the Syrians or the Lebanese were to open up the camps and integrate hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, they'd have to pay for them. They'd have to find housing and schooling and things of that nature. So you would potentially have people living in your country who are of a different ethnicity, who are jobless, homeless, etc. So in 2012, what are the major issues? Will a Palestinian state be established? Will Israel give up land to connect Gaza and the West Bank, which are part of the Palestinian Authority? In 1967, after the Six-Day War, the Israeli government encouraged Israelis to settle in the West Bank and Gaza. So the problem is, in the West Bank and Gaza, what's preventing the creation of a Palestinian state is the fact that there are many Israelis living in settlements in the West Bank and Gaza. So they're reluctant to give up their homes and their settlements for to work toward any kind of Palestinian state. They don't want to be a minority in a Palestinian state, is the bottom line. And making this more complicated, the United States has been trying to get the Israeli government to force Israelis out of the West Bank and Gaza and back into Israel, close the settlements to allow the West Bank and Gaza to become a Palestinian state. But that doesn't work. That doesn't go over very well in Israel. Lastly, the Palestinians argue for what is called the right of returns. Palestinians want land that was taken in 1948 returned to them. So one demand of the Palestinians is to allow all of the people who live in these camps all over the Middle East to be allowed to come back to the West Bank and Gaza, get land that was lost to them in 1948, or at least be given money for it. And as you can imagine, the Israelis don't like this very much, because it would cost them land or money in the process. So that's the real sticking point. The Israelis feel if they were to give up control of the West Bank and Gaza, if they were allowed them to become a Palestinian state, that it would really be dangerous, for their national security. This slide shows you a picture of the Shatila refugee camp in Beirut, Lebanon. It's a camp, but as you can see, it looks more like a slum. You've got 12,540 people as of 2002. The population's much more now, living in very, very squalid conditions. The jobs are very scarce. Unemployment is extremely high. So a lot of suffering that has been endured by the Palestinians since 1948. Since the 1970s, there's been somewhat of a change in the relationship between the Arab nations that surround Israel and Israel and the United States. In 1973, we had the last major war in the region between Israel and its neighbors, Egypt and Syria. This is when Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack. The Israeli army was surprised, but was able to regroup and defeat the Egyptians and the Syrians. But they did regain what is called the Golan Heights. And the Golan Heights is a little chunk of Syrian territory that they've refused to give back for security reasons. The fear is that if you give up the Golan Heights, then the Syrians would be able to place long-range missiles on the Golan Heights, or like a hilly mountainous area that would be able to fire onto Israeli territory. In 1979, the major breakthrough in the peace process happened between the Egyptians and the Israelis when the Camp David Accords were signed, and President Jimmy Carter brokered the deal. And this was really a major step forward because it allowed the Egyptians and the Israelis, who had been violent enemies since 1948, to lay down their arms and at least, if not become best friends, then at least engage a very cool peace. The Egyptian population is largely anti-Israeli, but the government has been pro peace. Since Mohamed Morsi, the new president of Egypt, has come into power, we're unsure about whether this accord is going to hold, but it has held since 1979. In 1987, things took a turn for the worse, where we had the first what is called Intifada, uprising by the Palestinian Liberation Organization, called the PLO, and this is really when the Israelis pushed into the West Bank and Gaza and began to actively occupy that region. This is before the Palestinian Authority was actually established, which gave the Palestinians some control over their own government, and a little bit of control. But the problem is the Israeli army can enter the West Bank and Gaza at will, and they have done so if they feel that their security is threatened. In 2002, a roadmap to peace initiative was stalled. It was an initiative that President George W. Bush paid lip service to and met with the Israelis on, and it was basically a roadmap towards developing a Palestinian state. In 2005, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon announced the program of disengagement, and he tried to forcibly remove Jewish settlers from the Gaza Strip, which was very, very violent. A lot of people resisted being moved, and in this picture you can see Israeli soldiers trying to move an Israeli settler out of his home. This did not go over very well in Israel, and Sharon's attempt failed. But what Sharon was trying to do was move all Israelis out of Gaza and eventually the West Bank, and just build a huge fence around the West Bank and Gaza and leave the Palestinians to their own devices. It was really a policy of disengagement, and I think it was part of Sharon's feeling that if we can't make peace with the with the Palestinians, then we will just build a huge fence for security and leave them to their own devices. And I think as a result, in January 2006, a group called Hamas won legislative control over the Palestinian Authority. And Hamas is a group that has as one of its party platforms, its party planks, the destruction of Israel. So as you can imagine, Hamas winning legislative control over the Palestinian Authority has really been very difficult for Israel to accept, because Hamas is considered a terrorist organization by the United States and by the Israelis, and has been very active in promoting violence against the Israelis. So this is really part of the problem of bringing peace. So we've got Hamas in control of the Palestinian Authority. We have question about whether a two-state solution can ever happen in this region, whether we can actually have a Palestinian state next to Israel. There's a problem with right of return. How much will Israel be willing to give up in terms of land to bring Palestinians back from those camps? And also security. Israel wants to make sure that if there is a nation state, a Palestinian nation state, that they will be secure and won't have to worry about terrorist activity. Thank you very much.